Thanks for giving us the opportunity, Fabiola and team, to talk a little bit more about the theory of change model, which is the model that we've chosen to use for the impact measurement project. So there we go. Can everyone see the first slide?
Yeah.
Perfect. Okay, great. So what we're going to talk through today is the actual theory of change model and how we intend to use it for the impact measurement project. So what's the purpose of this project? I believe many of you on the call are aware of what we're trying to achieve with this project, but just to reiterate, our main goal is to collect as many case studies as possible from as many places as possible that demonstrate the impact our profession has, which is the ultimate point of the work that we all do. We wanted to use a specific framework, and there are many we could have used, but we chose the theory of change one to link our clinical engineering activities with the wider health goals that we are working towards. We also wanted to assemble a data set that could be used for further research. So there are many people working on this initiative. Saba and Lorena and myself have put together a survey, and Saba and Lorena are both researchers and have had a lot of thoughts about how this data set about impact stories that we collect can be used for further research as well. Excuse me. So what is impact? This is a model that was part of my graduate thesis, where I was looking at what factors within a hospital in the organizational climate led to an effective clinical engineering service in that facility. So if you look at this diagram, that's obviously something that's looking at kind of the left-hand side of what's happening. But if you move towards the right on this arrow, the point of why we do what we do, we, as clinical engineers working in hospitals and health systems in all sorts of different capacities and roles, are always working to try to make sure that the medical equipment that's required for clinicians to treat patients and provide them with good care is available, and it's working, and it's where it should be. That's our main job. And the whole point of that is to support good patient outcomes and support good health and wellness of our communities. So my point in showing this is just to talk a little bit more about how we view impact for this project, which is very big picture. It's the big picture, blue sky thinking, what are we all doing here? What's our main goal? So impact is the whole point of what we do. As I said, it's big picture. So we're focused on how health systems are improved, how patient outcomes can be improved, the health and wellness of our patients, our families, and our communities. So very big picture. Well, we're doing that, and for the purpose of this project, we also think it's important and useful to think about impact broadly in terms of the different strategic priority areas that our health systems have and that the WHO has for health systems. And I'll talk about that a little bit more in a couple of slides. So next question, and this slide has a lot of information on it, and that was on purpose, is what is a theory of change model? So some of you may have worked with a theory of change model before. For many of you, it might be a new concept. If you Google, which I did, theory of change model, you'll see all sorts of different visual representations of what a theory of change can be. I've picked a few and just put them on this slide to demonstrate that there are different ways to put together a theory of change. But for the purpose of this project, we can think of a theory of change model as a framework for linking what we do as clinical engineers, so linking our activities, our actual work activities, our body of practice, if you will, with the wider impact that we are working towards. So the big picture health system goals of improving health systems, health services, improving the health of people. Theory of change is a very useful tool for filling in what's called the missing middle. By breaking down what happens in between these activities and the big picture goals. And if when this model is used in detail and in workshops, it can be also used to test causalities between different things that happen in between the activities and the big picture goal or impact. It's also, which lots of us, including myself, who have a very visual brain, find quite helpful. It's a quick visual representation of how these pieces all fit together. Theory of change models are used a lot by lots of nonprofit sector organizations, and they can really, a theory of change model can be used across at any stage really in a project, but they're often used during project planning. So at the beginning of planning a new project, to try to work back from the ultimate goal of a project and work backwards to figure out what activities need to happen to try to work towards that big goal. In this case, we're using the model retrospectively to look at things that have already happened, case studies and stories from you and your regions, to use this model to say, which activities did you do that contributed to a bigger goal? It's also often used for monitoring and evaluation of projects. And like I said earlier, it's just one of many models that could be used. And I don't want anyone to come away from this overview thinking that it's something that's very complicated or very rigid in terms of how different things are put into the categories in the model. It's more a high-level useful tool for us to use to organize a little bit of the information that we're asking you for around your success stories and your stories of impact. So just to get a little bit more specific, and I'm just looking for, oh, there we go. I was looking for this slide. This is what is typically included in a theory of change model. So the first thing, which we haven't asked for a lot of detail on in our survey because it's related to other areas, is inputs. So inputs are what resources are used to do something. So for example, inputs are people, their money, it's the number of people in your clinical engineering department, it's the budget that you have to do your work. It's very tangible, practical inputs to the process. Activities are actual activities or things that are done. So what things does that, for example, clinical engineering team in a hospital or clinical engineering function in a country, what does it do? Outputs are tangible things that are produced or delivered directly through the resources and the actions. So for example, if an activity is doing preventive maintenance on all the ventilators in your hospital, the actual output would be that all of the ventilators have undergone preventive maintenance and they are up to date with their service. The outcomes are bigger picture. So it's what does having up-to-date ventilators that are up to date with their servicing mean for your critical care function in your hospital? And then the wider impact is what's the longer term big picture vision that this contributes towards. And so in this case, it would be providing good critical care for your patients. So it's important to know that these links are not all completely causal. There are lots of other things happening in the background, and that's okay. So having in-service ventilators is not the only thing that you need to deliver good critical care, but it is an essential part of delivering good critical care. So that's how we think about the different parts in this model. And so, sorry, just to skip around because my slides are for some reason not in order. Here we go. So we decided to simplify the theory of change for this project to these 4 areas. And so what, excuse me, what we're asking is how the things that clinical engineers do, or our activities, cause specific things to happen. So those are outputs that contribute to larger changes more broadly, which are outcomes, and ultimately lead to longer term goals, which is our impact. So, for example, areas of priority for impact can be things like improving patient safety, diagnostics, better health access, equity, cost savings, improving hospital capacity, maternal and newborn health, emergency preparedness, etc. So these are areas that we're going to use once we have survey results to group the impact stories into. Another helpful way to work through a theory of change is by asking these questions. So this is, if you're looking at a project outset, you would say, if we do something, if we do an activity, it will tangibly lead to a particular output, which leads to broader outcomes and ultimately contributes to the bigger impact that we're trying to have. Now, since we're using the theory of change model retrospectively, the verbs will be different, but there's the same idea. So you can ask yourself, when our clinical engineering team did X activities, it specifically resulted in Y, the outputs, which broadly contributed to Z, the outcomes, and ultimately was a part of working towards our big picture impact or big picture goal for our health system. So we have two examples that we put together just to illustrate how we can use the theory of change for impact stories from our clinical engineering colleagues. So the first one, and I want to thank Dan Clark in particular from the UK for submitting this, is an example of what he and his clinical engineering colleagues in the UK did at the very beginning of the COVID pandemic. So this is a story. We have more information about it in the IPEM summer issue, which is their professional association's regular publication. And just very briefly to put this story of what they did into the theory of change model, what was done. So at the beginning of the pandemic, they had lots of ventilators that were non-standard to the UK and wouldn't typically be procured or on the market there. Excuse me, that they were rapidly sourcing and evaluating, as well as infusion devices. So the actual activity that they had to do in this unprecedented situation was to do that rapid technical and clinical evaluation of these specific devices that were non-standard to the UK. The tangible output of that was technical and clinical evaluation reports for each device, which then guided the outcome of the distribution and deployment of these non-standard devices into UK hospitals for a period of time to support the most critical point in the pandemic when they didn't have enough devices from their regular supply chains. And the big picture impact during that early phase of the pandemic was to meet this urgent national need. So that was the ultimate impact, was related to being able to try to deliver patient care in this unprecedented situation. And Dan noted, which was also really interesting to see and a really nice success angle to this specific theory of change story, that eventually most of the devices were later removed from service when their more standard devices were more widely available. But the national network that was created through this initiative is still functional and has influence within the Ministry of Health. So a great example of how our profession's work was really highlighted during the pandemic and the importance of it was. So that's one example, excuse me, of a theory of change model. I have a second example, which is a amazing initiative that took place in Zambia through various partners, including FET, the Tropical Health and Education Trust, and Nortec College. And this example is from the point of view of a project. So the activities, what did the project do? 8 of the graduates from the 4-year BMET diploma program that was created and is underway in Zambia were placed in district hospitals. They were each placed in a district hospital for a period of 8 months, and they were supplied with what they needed to do their job, technically speaking. So they had a toolkit, they had basic test equipment, and they had a workshop space. What were the outputs of this project, or of placing those BMETs in those facilities? Specifically, they worked on repairs, every repair they could possibly do, set up preventive maintenance and did preventive maintenance, and set up new user training programs for equipment users. The outcomes, and it's amazing to have this type of data, was that in these hospitals, the medical equipment uptime over the course of this 8 months increased from 71% to 93%, which is an amazing, amazing thing. And obviously the wider impact is improved patient care. So this is an example from a project point of view, and I wanted to use it specifically to illustrate, again, what I said earlier, which is this model is not very rigid. And so, for example, this is how this particular project was put in the theory of change model as a project, focusing on the placement of these graduates in the hospitals for a certain period of time. However, we could take this same information, the same story, and we could look at it specifically from a clinical engineering perspective. And we could say, yes, these graduates are in place, but that happens kind of before the activities. So that's an input if we're focusing in on clinical engineering activities. And so in this case, the actual activities would be corrective maintenance, preventive maintenance, and new user training programs. So what did CE do? They did these things. And then the output would be what happened tangibly as a result of this, a very specific thing. Medical equipment uptime at the hospitals increased from 71 to 93%. And then the outcome, what further changes happened as a result of that? Clinicians had more equipment that was in use, and they were better able to offer improved patient care. So I hope that this example also illustrates that there are different ways to use the model. And again, I really want to highlight that what our group is most interested in is your stories, and we don't want the process of putting them into this model to be a barrier to us collecting the stories. So this just illustrates that it can be, the theory of change model with our impact stories can be populated in different ways. These are some useful links. I think probably we can send out a copy of these slides after the meeting, and there are live links. There are loads of really useful pieces of information available online for free about the theory of change, if any of you are interested in learning more. This is a useful handout. This is a video that I actually got a screenshot from for earlier in the presentation, which is quite helpful. This is the THET project planning guide, which shows the theory of change from the beginning of a project when projects are being designed. This is a website that has loads of information as well. And you can just Google theory of change and you'll get more information than you could possibly want. So this is our project survey, and maybe what we can do next, Lorena, if you'd like to, or I can, is we can actually just open up the survey and take a look at it. So this is the project survey that we developed to, sorry, the project survey that we developed to try to capture your impact stories. So I think I'll get out of PowerPoint and do that now. Okay, great. Thanks for sharing. Yeah, so this is our survey. So it's very short. And if you can just scroll down, we give you a few examples of the theory of change model. And then we ask for information about impact stories that you can share in these 4 categories. So we ask for examples of activities, outputs, outcomes, and impact. The most important thing for us, though, is at the end of the survey, where we ask for any more information that you have on the case study or the impact story that you've shared. Excuse me. And so it's at this point that we ask you to link to online stories about the information you're sharing, journal articles, publications, any other information that provides more detail. And we just want to highlight that if this model still, or if you can share with your colleagues as you're working through your submissions, that if this still seems a bit complicated, or you're not exactly sure how to fill in the information in the model, and therefore some of the first questions in the survey, that's okay. What we really want to make sure we capture is all the information that you have about these case studies, because we'll be collecting these case studies from you, and we're hoping to get, as we said, as many as we can from as many places as we can. And then we'll be doing some analysis on what the submissions are. So the more information you can provide in the actual survey, the better. But if it seems intimidating to try to answer some of the theory of change models, then you can just fill in the information about where you're from, and you can add your case studies at the end, and we'll take it from there. So I've done a lot of talking. I wonder now, maybe we can open up the floor to any questions any of you might have. I'm also just curious, I was going to ask at the beginning, could we have a show of hands if any of you have worked with the theory of change model before for any of your work? Or if it's new?
Well, I would like to comment that also in the formal framework was not so familiar, but I think all of us, or most of us, are have been working on some of these phases of this theory of change. Sometimes instinctively, we have worked on these activities and focused on some of the specific tasks to do in our hospitals, and foreseeing the possible impacts that may have our work into the CE department. So the fact that you provide us of a tool that can organize the information we may have in the space and settle it down into a case study, it is very, very valuable. So I would like to thanks to you for this tool and for help us to settle down these case studies and to share with all.
Thanks, Fabi. Yeah, you actually said that much better than I could have. That we all work with this, we all work with different components of the model. So like you said, most people would be able to think about what activities they do and what the direct outputs of those activities are. And this is just a way that we're trying to organize the information. So thank you for sounding so clear when you were explaining that to everyone. And it just reminds me to say one more thing, which is, I'm not sure if I mentioned this when I was going through the slides, but you might have actual studies, for example, that you can submit that don't talk at all about the bigger outcomes or impact, but they are studies that say, well, we increased our staff, we brought on this many new techs and engineers, and we were able to do this much more work, and here's the data. Or we took maintenance of this certain type of equipment in-house, and this is what it meant for our hospital. So a lot of the clinical engineering literature that exists does link activities to outputs, and you can even fill in the survey with those pieces of information, and we can do the rest. I see a hand from Jen Kuhn.
Yes, I just have a quick question. And since this project is impact measurement, so how can we establish strong connections between the output and the outcomes? And how can we determine the contributing percentage, which does because the activities we clinical engineers do, and not the other factors.
Alan, your line is fuzzy, and I understood the first thing you said, but it was hard to hear for the rest. It was quite fuzzy. Are you able to repeat or get closer to your microphone, or else you could type in the question in the chat box?
Yeah, I just try to say it again, okay? How can we establish a strong connection between the output to the outcomes? Because our aim is to measure the impact, right? So
That was
we have the input activities and also the outputs. That's easy to determine. But speaking of the output and outcomes, there is still a lot of confounding factors, like other factors may also contribute a lot to the outcomes. So my question is, here still have some of the job we need to do to determine the clinical engineers' activities, the outputs that contribute to the outcome.
Okay, thanks, Alan. It was a little bit fuzzy, but I think I understood most of your point and your question. If I did, what I was hearing from you is you were saying, yes, there's a link, obviously, between activities and outputs. And we all know about the big picture impact we're trying to have, but that the output to outcome linkage is more convoluted because there are lots of confounding variables in the mix. Yes, okay, great. You're absolutely right. There are lots of confounding variables in the mix. We have talked about this a lot for this project because there are some stories or studies out there that might be able to show causality, but a lot of that output to outcome linkage has a lot of different confounding variables in it, and that's okay. So we are not trying to only showcase impact stories that show a fully causal, that are a rigorous study that show a fully causal relationship. If we have those, that's wonderful, but we're also looking for all of the stories we can possibly collect that we can put into this model. So we're looking for a big data set. And then the plan for, as we go forward, it will depend what the outcomes are of our session around this in October. But if we have a big enough data set, then there can be, and Saba and Lorena could probably speak more to this as researchers, but there can be a next phase of the research that drills down and looks at some of those relationships a little bit more, or uses a more statistically rigorous methodology to evaluate the relationships between, for example, some of the case studies that have outputs and outcomes.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks a lot for your question. Go ahead, Fabi.
Okay, thank you. Well, I am a little concerned about how to express the impact on the narrative. I saw two very interesting examples on your presentations, and one of them on the results, they show some numbers, right? They could measure the outputs by showing some numbers that reflect the difference between the initial phase and the current state of the project. But in terms of the output, I would like to know how can we express the impact, since we are looking for the big picture by identifying better health outputs or better patient care or something like, and in order that our case studies will be stronger, no, and to have more bases. I know not all the cases will have this opportunity, but for the ones that could, how could we manage this phase of the impact, the final stage? How can we express it? And we don't have enough numeralia to use it.
Yeah, that's that's a good question, Fabi. I think in general, numbers are most useful in the first two parts of the theory of change model, in the activities and the outputs. Those are typically things that are tangible activities that happen, things that can be measured as a result of those things that happen. And when we get to the outcomes and when we get to the impact, those aren't typically things that would necessarily have numbers associated with them. They might, the outcomes might, but the impact is much broader, and it's not, it's much broader, and just talks about kind of a big picture goal. And so what we see for the collection of stories with this model is that those big picture goals, that we can take our data set and look and see which ones focused on which particular areas of impact, if you will. That being said, similarly to what I said in response to Alan's comment and question, there are studies that have been done that have very specific causalities and have data provided at the outcome and the impact stage, and we can include those too. But the main objective of using this model is to collect, to form that data set. So to collect these different experiences of impact. I'm not sure if that answered your question very clearly.
Okay, well, you gave me some guidance, so I can work on this. Thank you.
Okay, Shauna, I want to add, sorry, I'm Lorena. First of all, Shauna, thank you for your great presentation. In order to answer both questions, I want to highlight that the most important thing is to collect your own perspective, your own story. For us, it's very important that you know the theory of change, because we consider that it's the best methodology to collect that stories, the different perspectives, the main points, or the points that we consider the main. But it doesn't matter that you have number or no number. Okay, it's perfect if you have the number of the one of the points. But theory of change is only the best way, or we consider the best way to collect this information and for analyze after that this information. But please, it's only to collect your perspective.
Yeah, thank you for that, Lorena. That was really clear. Yes, and like we said, there will be some specific case studies that show very specific links, but in general, this is a broader first step. We all see this work as being kind of a multi-year initiative, whatever shape that takes within CED, and we wanted to start by casting a very wide net and looking for as many stories as we could that showed some aspect of the impact that we clinical engineering professionals have, and provided a very kind of rough model for collecting those stories.
Okay, any other questions or comments? Well, I will ask our dear Rosanna to comment about this project. By the way, congratulations with your noms, your achievement. It's an honor to have you as my college and my board member. Please, Rosanna, can you comment about this project?
Thank you, Fabi. And again, apologize for the inconvenience. I'm late. Two observations. One, as you correctly stated, all of us in different ways and models have been working with the framework of this theory of change. Is not a discovery, but it's a so valuable tool. The opportunity for each of us, the second observation is the opportunity for each of us to provide contents which enrich the work, the work after the process of collection. This is a really interesting aspect for, in my opinion, to be remarked. We all work very hard, and distinctively in several contexts, making the best and making collecting findings. This collection of information that will be systematized by the team, Shauna, Saba, and Lorena, will let us set in value our efforts and share in a valuable way contents for us to improve, which is the main objective of all of efforts of CET. And this is an opportunity for us to make it happen. I find the forms clear. I find also through the interventions today that it won't be a problem to adjust a bit or adapt some information. The main objective, colleagues, is to set the information in the forms in order to receive after knowledge that will let us make improvements in our interventions. Thank you, Fabiola.
Thank you, Rosanna. And a very important point that you settled is the value that we want to prove the value of our activities by sharing these experiences, and the theory of change will help us to organize, as I said before, this case studies and this narrative, so we can appreciate the value and express to the world this value. Thank you. Thank you.